The Ontario government has capped the rent increase for 2024 at 2.5% for any property that has been occupied before November 15th, 2018. If your property has been occupied after November 15th, 2018, and you could actually raise the rent by any amount you so choose for the 2024. Let's go through that announcement and a couple of the rules around the increase. I'm Michael Luzes. I'm a realtor in the Greater Toronto Area. If you ever want to book in a call with me, click on that first link in the description down below. So here's the article on the Ontario.ca website, and this was on June 30th, 2023. So Ontario is capping rent increases below the rate of inflation. The province is holding the rent increase guideline at 2.5% in 2024. The press release goes on to say that the Ontario government is continuing to strengthen protections for tenants by holding the rent increase guideline for 2024 at 2.5%, well below the average inflation rate of 5.9%. The rent increase guideline of 2.5% is the maximum amount a landlord can increase rent during the year for most tenants without the approval of the Landlord and Tenant Board. The guideline is based on the Ontario's Consumer Price Index, a measure of inflation calculated by Stats Canada using data that reflects economic conditions over the past year. Under the Residential Tenancies Act, the guideline is capped at 2.5% to help protect tenants from rising interest rates that would result in higher rent. Without the cap, the recent rate of inflation would have resulted in an increase of 5.9% in 2024. Steve Clerk, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, mentions that this decision builds on the historic tenant protections contained in our recent Helping Home Buyers Protecting Tenants plan and demonstrates our commitment to help tenants across the province. In 2022, Ontario broke ground on nearly 15,000 new purpose-built rentals, a 7.5% increase from 2021 and the highest number on record. This year, rental starts across the province total more than 8,500 new units, which is a 77% increase over January to May of 2022. Now, there are a couple quick facts here on the news release, and I would suggest to reach out to a paralegal if you ever needed any advice when it comes to either the landlord side or the tenant side. Under these quick facts, it does say that landlords may only raise rent if they give tenants at least 90 days written notice using the correct form, and at least 12 months must have passed since the first day of the tenancy or the last rent increase. The next point, in most cases, rent increases cannot be more than the rent increase guideline. Landlords can apply to the Landlord-Tenant Board for above guideline rent increases under certain circumstances, such as after eligible capital work has been paid for and finished. So I clicked on that link from the news release about the above rent guideline, and I found it interesting that there was one thing they did not mention in the news release. So they mentioned that such as after eligible capital work has been paid for and finished. Now, when you click this link here, and this brings you to the Tribunals Ontario Landlord Tenant Board. And again, if you are looking for any advice when it comes to either the landlord side or the tenant side, definitely consult a paralegal. I just wanted to go through this news release and click on some of the links and show what is actually on the release itself. So this is the information about applications for a rent increase above the guideline. And then right here it says, when can a landlord apply for a rent increase above the guideline? First one is landlord's costs for municipal taxes and charges have increased by an extraordinary amount. And this is something that they did not mention in that article. See when an increase in costs for taxes is extraordinary on page 2. So here on page 2, an increase in cost for taxes is considered extraordinary if it is greater than the guideline plus 50% of the guideline. So they used 2007 of a guideline of 2.6%, which is a long time ago. But anyway, right now we're at 2.5% as just mentioned. So 2.5% times 50% is 1.25. And then 2.5% plus 1.25 would be an increase of 3.75. Now, we don't know what the new tax increase is going to be for the City of Toronto, as that was something that was definitely proposed during the recent elections. So it'll be interesting to see if that number is greater than 3.75% for 2024. Would that be considered extraordinary? And would you be able to increase the rent past what the guideline is? And that's something that they did not mention in this news release, which I found very interesting. So here's some other quick facts on the news release is that the rent increase guideline applies to the vast majority, approximately 1.4 million of rental households covered by the Residential Tenancies Act, does not apply to rental units occupied for the first time after November 15, 2018, vacant units, community housing, long-term care homes, or commercial properties. Rent increases are not automatic or mandatory, and landlords may only raise the rent if they give tenants 90 days written notice using the correct form, and at least 12 months must have passed since the first day of the tenancy or the last rent increase. In most cases, the rent increase cannot be more than the rent increase guideline. Landlords can apply to Landlord and Tenant Board for above guideline rent increases under certain circumstances. An example they give is such as after eligible capital work has been paid for and finished. I'd encourage you to go to this news release to click on the different forms to see all the different details when it comes to a rent increase for either landlords or tenants. In Ontario, they broke ground on 15,000 new purpose-built rentals. And the one thing to consider is that those purpose-built rentals will be occupied after November 15, 2018. Of course, we're 5 years away from that. So it'll be interesting to see if in the future those purpose-built rental properties, if they adhere to the 2.5% guideline, or if they just raise the rent more in line with inflation moving forward. And if you do have any data when it comes to that on any of the details of the purpose-built rentals that have been occupied in the last few years, I'd love to hear about it. I'm Michael Luzis. Thanks for watching.